You know, before we begin this morning, I just want to acknowledge the announcement that was made last week, the announcement about transitions here among the clergy here at St. Luke's and what that means for you as a congregation. And, you know, it was announced that I would be leaving St. Luke's in just a couple of weeks, and I'll be become the full-time pastor at Free. And so I just want to take a moment and say thank you. Thank you for journeying with me and allowing me to journey with you over these past 7.5 years. You know, I've told a lot of people over this past week that when I reflect back on my time at St. Luke's, and I've been doing a lot of that lately, that I am truly filled with nothing but gratitude. And I have to tell you, that's a pretty powerful place for me to be in my life. Thank you for loving me and my family so well. You know, when I first got to St. Luke's, man, I was just a young buck, 30 years old. We just had one kid at the time. Tammy was pregnant with our second little baby girl, and man, I had so much to learn about Thank you. So much to learn about ministry and what it means to be a pastor, and you all have taught me so much. You've taught me a lot, and what I know is you gave me all kinds of grace along the way. Thank you for that. And I know I still have so much left to learn about ministry and being a pastor. And come on now. And thank you, too, for creating the space for us to live into our mission and values and our words here at St. Luke's, that word beyond, to go beyond the walls of this church and reach an entire new demographic of people. Thank you for that. And I think for the pastors coming after us, they're really lucky to have you guys. And I actually mean that. They're lucky. But now we need to spend a few minutes talking about the Bible. And what is it? And do we need this thing, or can we just push it to the side? You know, it was back in November, just a couple of months ago. We celebrated our 1-year anniversary at Free, and on this night we had a big celebration, and at the end of the evening I invited anyone who wanted to come forward to share what this community has meant to them to come up to the mic. And a lot of people came up to the mic, but what stands out is what one young lady said when she came up to the microphone. And I should tell you that she does not have any church experience like many of the people at Free. And she came to the mic and she said, "Man, I'm familiar with the big book. I read that thing." And she was referring, of course, to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. But then she said, "But here, y'all have us reading the big book." And she was referring to the Bible. And then she said this line, and I'll quote her without using the expletives that she used on that evening. She said, "Man, that is as confusing as And then she said, "But every single week, I come here and I hear a story about a God who is always with us and a God who is so full of love, and I see that I need these stories." And y'all, every pastoral bone in my body wanted to jump up and shout out, "Amen, sister, you got it, preach it." You just summarized it in one sentence. I didn't do that. I stayed seated because that would have been a bit creepy. So I just stayed seated and I shook my head and I smiled when she got done. I gave her a big hug. You know, one of my favorite theologians, I've quoted him often before, I've used his work in here before, Rob Bell. He says this about the Bible, and see if it resonates with you. It does with me. He opens his recent book with saying, "I want to help you read the Bible in a better way." Because lots of people don't know how to read it. And so they either ignore it or they read it badly and cause all kinds of harm. Some people see the Bible as an outdated book of primitive, barbaric fairy tales that we have moved beyond. And so they ignore it. missing all of the progressive and enlightened ideas that first entered human history through the writers of the Bible. Ideas and ideals we still fall far short of. Ideas and ideals that are still way ahead of our present consciousness and practice. And then there are the folks who talk about how important and central and inspired the Bible is, but then butcher it with their stilted literalism and stifling interpretations, which I just think is all kinds of a great line. Assuming that it says one thing, and if you just get that one thing, then you've read it well. But I want you to read the Bible in a whole new way. And I have to tell you all, it is one of my greatest joys of being a pastor is to help people read the Bible in a whole new way, a way that brings life, a way that brings surprising moments of joy, a way that brings surprising moments of discomfort, because we need the discomfort too, don't we? If we want to grow, we need discomfort. In a way that when you read that thing, you say, man, I didn't know that was there. Man, I didn't know that was in the Bible. I didn't know that was there. And see, I've shared with you guys so many times before, too, that I grew up in a culture and a community that read the Bible that I think in lots of ways caused some harm. Because we read it in such a way that God was always on our side. And if God was on our side, then that meant God wasn't on your side. And we had the correct, the right, the one interpretation. And if you didn't share that interpretation, well, God was certainly against you. And when you died, you were going to go to this place of suffering forever and ever and ever. Makes sense, right? And that's the good news. But then I got to college, and I started having these experiences with my New Testament professor. And man, every time I walked into that classroom and we engaged a story, it was just absolutely mind-blowing for me. And everything in my life, in my world, including God, got way, way bigger. And I kept having these moments like, oh my goodness, how did I miss that? How did I miss it? It's right there. How did I miss the thing that is right in front of me? And I kept having this feeling like everything that was happening with them back then has a lot to do with what's happening with us now. Like the ways in which they experienced God in their world has everything to do with the ways in which we experience God in our world. And by the way, it's the same question so many of you all have asked over the years after a sermon when you come up to me and say, man, how did I miss that? I've been reading the Bible for years. How did I miss that? How did I miss what was right in front? Well, because we're human. I mean, that's a simple answer. We're human, and we have these very human experiences, and these experiences allow us to keep seeing things, new things along the way. So you didn't see it because your experiences haven't brought you there yet. You see it now because your experiences are allowing you to see it. So before we move on, I want to share with you some resources that I have found immensely helpful along the way. So many of you are always asking for resources, books, and when we quote people, who wrote that book and what's it about? So here's some resources for you. The first one, and I had it about a list of a dozen. I boiled it down to 4. The first one is, I quoted from this just a few minutes ago. It's Rob Bell's newest book, What is the Bible? And he has this beautifully long subtitle. I'll let you read that. In my opinion, he is, and I realize the weightiness of what I'm saying here, he is the best theological and spiritual communicator of our time. He has a way of making these ideas, and notice I didn't say the best scholar and theologian. I think he's a good scholar and theologian, but he has a way of taking these ideas and making them make sense to people like us. He begins with the question, which again I find really, really helpful. He begins with this question, why did these stories endure? That, my friends, is a good question to ask when we approach the Bible. Why did these stories endure? The second book I would highly recommend to you. I read this book in college, reading the Bible again for the first time, and he has this subtitle, Taking the Bible Seriously But Not Literally. He's a biblical scholar by the name of Marcus Borg. I read this book in college, and it was, again, that experience that was absolutely mind-blowing for me. It changed my world and my life in all sorts of ways. I began giving that book out as gifts to different people. Some people appreciated it more than others. He had a way of being the first one for me to really highlight the idea that the Bible is a human response to God. That the Old Testament is the product of ancient Israel, and the New Testament is the product of the early Christian movement or the early Jesus followers. And so what that means is the words of the Bible are the words of these communities, not God's words. He starts with the question. Questions are really, really important, especially when we're talking about wonder. He starts with the questions, why did they tell these stories, and why did they tell them in this way? Yeah, those are good questions to ask when we approach the biblical text. The third book I would highly, highly recommend is a book called Reading the Bible from the Margins. He's a Latino scholar, Miguel de la Torre. He was one of my seminary professors. I took every class I could with him because when he started talking and we started reading Scripture together, I realized how much I had to learn. He's a Latino scholar, and what he highlighted for me, which I found really helpful, was the ways in which we as a community interpret these texts is so much determined by our social location. And so he had this, he does these alternative readings of the text. They were alternative to me anyway, from the perspectives of the poor and the marginalized and the suffering communities in our midst. And I need that interpretation. I need those perspectives. I think we need those perspectives. And that leads me to the fourth resource that I also highly recommend. It is the Women's Bible Commentary. It's been updated. It's gone through several revisions over the years. It's a commentary on all the text of the Old and New Testament, and they do a beautiful job with highlighting the perspectives of women and the really, really, really important roles of women in the ancient text that people like me so often miss. And I say that because when you are consulting, the Spirit is moving. When you are consulting resources about the text, when you're thinking of what book should I read, who should I be interacting with when it comes to understanding the Bible, pick resources that leave you saying, man, how did I miss that? How did I miss that? If you're just reading it and you agree with it all, yep, knew that. Yep, that's what I always thought. No. Pick resources that leave you saying, how did I miss that? I didn't know that was there. Because y'all know in the rabbinic tradition, they talk about Scripture as having 70 faces. And they talk about Scripture as the 70 faces like a gem. And you just keep turning the gem, and you let the light in to refract the different faces, the various faces in new and unexpected ways. You get to keep turning the gem. Because y'all know the Bible isn't just a single book. It is a library of voices, story after story about people waking up to God in their midst. And we get to interact with these stories. We get to learn from them. We get to enter into the conversation. And that is a holy and sacred endeavor. We get to keep turning the gem together. We get to keep waking up to God in our midst together. And my friends, this is not a one-time process. It happens over and over and over if we're open to it, if we're open to keep turning the gem. It happened to me just this week. Just this week, I was rereading the story of the Magi. And I won't hang out here long because I know we were in the story of the Magi last week, the story of the three kings or the three wise men. And here I am rereading this story. And I had this experience like, oh my goodness, how did I miss that? I have read this story for years. I've read it dozens of times. How did I miss that? Story of the Magi. It's found in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2, which, by the way, many scholars say Matthew is the gospel for facing change. Yeah, I've been hanging out in Matthew lately. Here the Magi are, the intellects. But they're also these really cool people of the ancient world who they searched and they followed and they took great risks along the way. And here they are. They take a step on this new journey. And you know what's so cool about this? They didn't know exactly how it was going to turn out. They weren't given a roadmap. They weren't given guarantees. In fact, they completely missed it along the way. But when they took that step out on this new journey, these unexpected gifts from really unexpected people and places started showing up. How did I miss that? You see, when you're being asked, or maybe we should use the word called, when you're being called to take a new step in your life, and you are scared, you're afraid because you don't know exactly what this is going to look like. You don't know what any sort of destination looks like. You don't know if things are going to go well. You don't know if things are going to fall apart. Spirit says to you, I have some resources for you after you take that step. Provision, guidance, support comes after you take that step. How many of y'all have experienced that with God? It comes after you take the step. And how many of y'all have had the opposite experience too? Where you said, no, God, let me tell you how we're going to do this, God. Yeah, let me know how it works out for you. I can tell you how it works for me. Let me tell you, God, how we're going to do this. See, you're going to give me the gifts up front, and I'm going to stockpile those gifts so that I know I have enough reserves. You're going to give me enough information up front. You're going to give me the guarantees up front because I need to know it's all going to be smooth sailing, and then I'll take that step. And every time I try to pull that mess with God, God says, no, Ryan, that's not the way this works. You take the step because this project is about the F word, faith. Faith. We're not real good at that in our culture sometimes, are we? We want more information. We want more guarantees. We become addicted to the guarantee. And see, oftentimes what happens is we want to use the Bible as some sort of roadmap, an answer book. And if we can just flip to the right page, or if we can just read it enough and get that one interpretation, then we'll have it. But my friends, the Bible, it's not an answer book. It's a dialogue partner. It's a dance partner if we let it be. And the beautiful thing about a good partner is you get to read it. But when we decide to get honest, we also allow it to read us. You see, the Bible can, for us, be the great reminder of what it's like to wake up to God in our midst. And I don't know about y'all, but I need those stories. I think we need those stories. You know, there's an ancient story about a man named Jacob. You can read about it in the first book of the Old Testament, the book called Genesis chapter 28. He has this magnificent dream. But see, before he was dreaming, the backstory to Jacob is he was on the run. Completely on the run. And remember how the story starts with Jacob's father Isaac is on his deathbed. He's got an older brother Esau. Isaac is dying, and the tradition of the day had it that when your father was on the deathbed, the father would give the blessing to the eldest son. Which would essentially be saying to the eldest son, look, all I have is yours. Look around. It's all yours. Well, Jacob, the younger son, wanted the blessing. So Esau is off working in the fields, and Jacob puts on a false identity and tries to act like Esau, and he goes into his dad's room and he says, Pops, can I have the blessing? Isaac says, who are you? Come on, Pops, it's me, it's Esau. Long story short, he gets the blessing, steals the blessing. Esau gets home that day. You think he's happy? No, he's furious. He wants to kill Jacob. So Jacob is on the run. He's bouncing from town to town, city to city, trying to run away from who he is and who God is. And then Jacob falls asleep and he has this dream. And in this dream, God speaks to Jacob. And God says to Jacob, Jacob, I am the God of your father Abraham. I am the God of your father Isaac. And I have been with you. And I am with you now. In the next city you run to, I'm going there with you too. Because Jacob, my boy, I am always with you. No matter what you're going through, I am going with you. And then you get this beautiful verse. When Jacob woke from his sleep, he thought to himself, God is definitely in this place, but I wasn't aware of it until now. And see, the power of the story is this timeless reminder that God hasn't changed. It's Jacob who wakes up to a whole new awareness of who and where God is. I mean, how many of us need to keep turning the gem so that we keep waking up to the experience of God being everywhere, all the time, always with us, no matter what change you are going through, no matter what transition you are going through, no matter what struggle you are going through, no matter what joy you are going through, God always with you, Emmanuel. You see, as my friend with no church experience reminded me, the whole thing is full of stories about a God who is always with us and a God who is so full of love, and we need those stories. We as a people need those stories. So as we journey together over the next several weeks in this theme of wonder and the questions that shape us, the questions that form us and transform us, I want to encourage you and challenge you to enter deeply into the practice of wonder, the lost art of wonder. Ask your best questions along the way. What are the things you are just now waking up to in the world? And where are the moments in your life where you've said, God is definitely in this place, but I wasn't aware of it until now, until looking back? Where are the moments in your life where you see things differently? You used to see them this way, but now you see them this way, and you know that once you see, you can't unsee. Once you taste, you can't untaste. And my brothers and sisters, where are we together waking up in the world? And it's not about the question of, well, where's God showing up? Because God's always been there. But where are we waking up? Where are we showing up to everything God is doing all around us?